The Zilani were dying. Not from war, not from disease, but from irrelevance. In the vast expanse of the Galactic Council, where species were ranked by military might, technological prowess, and territorial control, the Zilani ranked dead last. They were barely 3 feet tall, with delicate crystalline skin that shattered under the slightest pressure. Their homeworld of Zephyria was a backwater planet that most star charts didn't even bother to include. For over 2 millennia, the Zilani had lived in perfect peace. They had no armies, no weapons, no concept of violence. Their greatest achievements were philosophical treatises and mathematical theorems. Their cities were made of living crystal that grew from the ground in spiraling towers of impossible beauty. Their art was created through harmonic resonance. Their music could heal emotional wounds, and their literature explored the depths of consciousness itself. But in a galaxy where strength was measured by the size of one's fleet and the power of one's weapons, such accomplishments meant nothing. Ambassador Crixus stood trembling before the council chamber, his translucent blue form barely visible against the massive obsidian walls. The other delegates towered over him, the brutish Gorak warriors with their chitinous exoskeletons and battle scars, the technologically advanced Nexari with their cybernetic implants gleaming under the chamber lights, the diplomatically cunning Vorthan Empire representatives with their cold reptilian eyes that calculated the value of every word. The chamber itself was a monument to galactic power. Massive holographic displays showed the territorial boundaries of each species, their military capabilities, their economic influence. The Zilani territory was barely visible, a tiny cluster of peaceful worlds on the galaxy's outer rim. The Zilani request protection under Article 47 of the Galactic Accords, Crixus announced, his voice barely above a whisper through the translation matrix. His crystalline hands shook as he held the formal petition, the document seeming to glow with inner light. A rumble of laughter echoed through the chamber. The sound was harsh, dismissive, cruel. The Gorak delegate, General Thrak, leaned forward with amusement, his massive frame casting a shadow over the small Zilani ambassador. Protection? From what? A strong breeze. More laughter erupted from the assembled delegates. The Nexari representative adjusted his cybernetic eye, scanning the Zilani with visible disdain. Their bone density is barely measurable. Their muscle mass is negligible. They have no defensive capabilities whatsoever. The Skarn marauders have been raiding our outer colonies, Crixus explained, his voice growing smaller with each word. Our people cannot defend themselves. We have no military, no weapons, no spine, interrupted Chancellor Vex of the Vorthan Empire, his reptilian voice carrying the authority of someone who controlled a third of the galaxy's trade routes. The Zilani have been pacifists for millennia. You've contributed nothing to galactic security, nothing to our technological advancement, nothing to our economic growth. Why should we waste resources protecting those who won't protect themselves? The chamber erupted in agreement. Species after species voiced their dismissal of the Zilani plea. They were called parasites, weaklings, evolutionary failures. Some delegates openly questioned whether the Zilani even deserved to be considered a sentient species. Look at them, scoffed the Altarian representative, his golden skin shimmering with superiority. They can't even maintain eye contact during a formal address. How can they expect to defend anything? Their entire civilization is built on crystals, added the Kepler delegate. Living crystals. One seismic charge and their cities would collapse like glass sculptures. Crixus felt his crystalline form begin to dim with despair. He had known this would be the response, but he had hoped, foolishly hoped, that somewhere in this vast assembly of civilizations, there might be compassion for the innocent. The Skarn have destroyed 17 of our colonies, he said quietly, his voice breaking. Our people are refugees in their own system. Children are dying in the crystal caves where they hide. We have nowhere else to turn. Then perhaps, Chancellor Vex said with cold finality, it's time for natural selection to take its course. The chamber fell silent at those words. Even among the harsh realities of galactic politics, there was something chilling about casually discussing the extinction of an entire species. But in the back of the chamber, a single voice cut through the silence. We'll train them. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to the small delegation from a relatively new species, humans. Their representative, Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, stood calmly, his brown eyes steady despite being surrounded by beings who could crush him with a thought. The human delegation was small, occupying one of the minor platforms reserved for species with limited galactic influence. I'm sorry. Did the human just volunteer to train the galaxy's weakest race? General Thrax's laughter boomed through the chamber, echoing off the crystalline walls. That's exactly what I said, Rodriguez replied evenly, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had faced impossible odds before. Give us 6 months with the Zelani volunteers. If we can't make them capable defenders, we'll personally guarantee their protection ourselves. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Humans were barely 50 years into galactic contact, still considered a minor species themselves. They controlled only a handful of worlds, had a modest fleet, and were known primarily for their stubborn refusal to acknowledge when they were outmatched. The idea of them training anyone was absurd. The humans can barely protect themselves, called out the Nexari representative. Their technology is primitive, their military is insignificant, their influence is negligible. Exactly, Chancellor Vex said, his reptilian eyes gleaming with opportunity. Very well, human. But when you fail, and you will fail, humanity will owe the Vorthan Empire a significant debt. Are you prepared for those consequences? Rodriguez looked directly at Crixus, seeing hope flicker in the Zelani's crystalline eyes for the first time in decades. In that moment, the human colonel saw something that the rest of the galaxy had missed. Not weakness, but untapped potential. Not failure, but a species that had simply never been given the chance to discover what they were truly capable of. We accept. The human training facility on Luna Station orbited a barren moon in neutral space, its stark metallic corridors a sharp contrast to the flowing organic architecture that the Zelani were accustomed to. The station had been hastily converted from a mining operation, its industrial framework now housing dormitories, training areas, and medical facilities designed to accommodate species with vastly different physiological needs. As the Zelani transport ship, Crystal Harmony, approached the docking bay, 50 volunteers prepared for what would be the most significant moment in their species' recent history. The ship itself was a marvel of Zelani engineering. Grown rather than built, its crystalline hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as both communication and navigation systems. Lieutenant Emily Johnson watched them disembark through the observation deck, her breath catching at the sight. Each Zelani was unique in their crystalline patterns, some showing veins of sapphire blue, others displaying emerald green or deep amethyst purple. Their forms seemed to capture and refract the station's artificial lighting, creating prismatic rainbows that danced across the docking bay walls. They moved with careful, deliberate steps, their fragile forms seeming to flow rather than walk, each movement considered and graceful. The volunteers represented the best of their species. Scientists, philosophers, artists, and engineers who had never raised a hand in violence but were willing to learn in order to save their people. Among them was Thix, a young crystalline being whose silver-veined form marked him as belonging to the scholar caste. His large, multifaceted eyes reflected his nervousness as he took his first steps onto the human station. "Ma'am," Sergeant Michael Torres approached Johnson, his datapad displaying streams of medical data. "The preliminary scans are fascinating. Their bone density is practically non-existent by our standards. We're talking about internal structures that are more like organic crystal matrices than actual bones. But their nervous system is incredibly advanced. Reaction times are off the charts, and their sensory processing capabilities are beyond anything we've recorded." Johnson nodded, studying the new arrivals as they clustered together in the docking bay, their musical language creating harmonious tones that seemed to resonate through the metal walls. What about their psychological profiles? Peaceful to a fault. No recorded instances of violence in their entire documented history. They've literally never fought anyone about anything. Their conflict resolution is entirely based on consensus and philosophical debate. Some of our psychologists are wondering if they're even capable of aggressive action. Dr. Elena Vasquez joined them at the observation window, her xenobiology expertise evident in the way she studied the Zilani movements. Their physiology is remarkable. Those crystalline structures aren't just decorative, they're functional. They can store and process information at the cellular level, which explains their advanced nervous system capabilities. One of the Zilani approached the observation deck, her movements graceful despite the obvious unfamiliarity with the station's artificial gravity. It was Zara, the group's appointed leader, a title that meant very little in their consensus-based society, but had been created specifically for this mission. Her crystalline skin showed flecks of gold, indicating she was slightly older than the others, and her form possessed an elegant dignity that transcended species barriers. Human Johnson. Zara's voice came through the universal translator, soft and melodic like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. We are grateful for your assistance, but we must ask, why do you help us? In the Great Chamber, we heard many species speak of strength, of power, of what benefits they might gain. But you speak of training us without asking for territory or resources in return. What do you gain from helping the weakest race in the galaxy? Johnson looked down at the small being, her mind flashing back to her own species' history, the countless times humans had been underestimated, written off, dismissed as too young or too weak or too stubborn to matter in the grand scheme of things. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her about the early days of human space exploration, when they were considered primitive by every other species they encountered. Because everyone deserves the right to defend their home, Zara. And because I have a feeling you're stronger than you think. Sometimes strength isn't about how hard you can hit. Sometimes it's about refusing to give up when everyone expects you to fail. The first training session was an unmitigated disaster. The humans had set up what they considered a basic obstacle course in Training Bay 7. Nothing too demanding by human standards, just some low walls to climb over, a few balance beams to navigate, and a short sprint to the finish line. The equipment had been scaled down to accommodate the Zilani's smaller stature, but the challenges remained fundamentally the same. The Zilani volunteers lined up eagerly, their crystalline forms shimmering with nervous energy and determination. They had spent the journey from Zephyria discussing what they might learn, sharing theories about human training methods, and preparing themselves mentally for the challenges ahead. The first volunteer, a young Zilani named Kef whose crystalline patterns showed streaks of silver indicating his youth, approached the first obstacle. A wall barely 3 feet high that any human child could easily climb. He examined it carefully, running his delicate fingers along the surface, trying to understand the best approach. With careful precision, he placed his hands on the wall's surface and attempted to pull himself up. His crystalline arms, beautiful but fragile, began to strain under his own minimal body weight. Hairline fractures appeared along his forearms as he struggled, the stress causing his crystalline structure to develop visible cracks. His arms gave out completely, and he crashed to the training mat, his crystalline skin crackling with a sound like breaking glass, the musical tones of his distress filling the training bay. "Medical!" Johnson shouted, rushing to help the injured Zilani, her heart sinking as she realized the magnitude of the challenge they faced. But something unexpected happened that would change everything. As the medical team approached with their equipment, Kef's cracks began to seal themselves, the crystalline structure slowly reforming, the fractures healing with tiny sparkles of light. Within minutes, his arms were whole again, the crystal matrix having repaired itself completely. He stood up slowly, brushed off the crystal dust, and looked at the wall with renewed determination rather than defeat. "I wish to try again," he said simply, his voice carrying a quiet resolve that surprised every human present. By the end of the day, not a single Zilani had completed the course. But more importantly, not a single one had given up either. 3 weeks into training, the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been spending sleepless nights in the xenobiology lab, her research station cluttered with crystalline samples, neural scan readouts, and physiological data that defied conventional understanding. The soft hum of analysis equipment filled the sterile environment as she ran test after test, trying to unlock the secrets hidden within Zilani physiology. She burst into the command center with excitement, her research datapad clutched in her hands, her hair disheveled from hours of intensive study. The command center buzzed with activity as human officers monitored the ongoing training sessions, their faces showing the strain of 3 weeks of limited progress. "Colonel Rodriguez, you need to see this immediately," she said breathlessly, her eyes bright with discovery. Rodriguez looked up from the disappointing training reports spread across his desk. The Zilani were improving, certainly, but at a pace that seemed glacial compared to their 6-month deadline. Each day brought marginal gains, a few seconds faster here, a slightly higher jump there, but nothing that suggested they would ever be capable of defending themselves against serious threats. "What is it, Doctor? Please tell me you've found something that can help us turn this around." "The Zilani aren't just fragile, they're evolutionary masterpieces," she announced, activating the holographic display system. "Their crystalline structure isn't a weakness. It's the most sophisticated adaptive defense mechanism I've ever encountered. Watch this." She pulled up microscopic footage of Zilani tissue under stress, the crystalline matrices glowing with internal energy as they responded to damage. When their crystalline structure breaks, it doesn't just heal randomly. It reinforces itself specifically against the type of damage it received. Each break creates a memory pattern in their cellular structure. They're literally learning at the molecular level. Rodriguez leaned forward, studying the swirling patterns of light within the tissue samples. "You're saying they adapt to damage?" "More than that. Their nervous system processes sensory information at approximately 300% the speed of human neural networks. But here's the remarkable part. It's not just processing what's happening now, it's creating predictive models of what's about to happen. They can literally see attacks coming before they're fully committed." She switched to brain scan imagery, showing the complex neural pathways that lit up like a Christmas tree during sensory input. Their minds are constantly running thousands of microsimulations, predicting movement patterns, calculating trajectories, anticipating actions based on minute physical cues that other species can't even perceive. If they're that advanced, why haven't they used these abilities before? Dr. Vasquez smiled grimly. Because they've never needed to. 2,000 years of absolute pacifism meant these abilities remained dormant. They've literally forgotten they're natural-born precognitive combat specialists. It's like discovering that sheep are actually wolves who've simply chosen to eat grass. The revelation changed everything about their training approach. The next morning, Training Bay 7 had been completely reconfigured. Gone were the obstacle courses designed to build strength and endurance. In their place were complex movement scenarios designed to test prediction, timing, and precision. The lighting had been adjusted to create shifting shadows and visual challenges that would force the Zilani to rely on their enhanced sensory processing. Lieutenant Johnson stood in the center of the training mat, surrounded by 5 Zilani volunteers, including Zara and Kef. Instead of teaching them to be stronger, she was about to teach them to be what they already were, but had never known they could be. "Forget everything we've taught you about blocking and resisting," she called out, her voice echoing in the reconfigured space. "Today we learn about flow. Don't try to stop attacks. Become the water that flows around the rock." She lunged forward with a padded training weapon, aiming directly for Zara. The Zilani leader's crystalline form seemed to shimmer and shift, moving with fluid grace as the attack passed harmlessly through the space where she had been a fraction of a second before. "Excellent. You saw it coming before I fully committed to the strike," Johnson observed, genuinely impressed. "Your nervous system calculated my trajectory from micro-movements I wasn't even aware I was making." She spun and aimed for Kef, who ducked with such smooth precision it looked like a choreographed dance rather than a defensive maneuver. His young form bent backwards in an arc that would have been impossible for most species, the attack whistling over his crystalline features by mere millimeters. "Now the advanced exercise," Johnson announced, increasing the pace. "Multiple attackers, random patterns, no predetermined sequences." 3 human trainers joined the exercise, each moving with different styles and timing. The Zilani found themselves in the center of a complex web of attacks, each strike coming from a different angle, at a different speed with different intentions. And they flowed through it like living light. Zara twisted between 2 simultaneous strikes, her form seeming to bend in ways that defied physics. Kef dropped below a horizontal swing while simultaneously stepping away from a vertical strike. Thix, the silver-veined scholar, moved with mathematical precision, each dodge calculated to put him in the perfect position to avoid the next attack in the sequence. Within minutes, the 5 Zilani were moving as if they shared a single consciousness, each one's movement complementing the others, creating a defensive pattern that was both beautiful and absolutely impenetrable. Sergeant Torres watched in amazement from the observation deck. "Ma'am, they're not just dodging. They're predicting attack combinations that we haven't even decided to make yet." "That's not the best part," Johnson replied with a growing smile. "Show them, Zara." The Zilani leader nodded and picked up a training weapon, a lightweight staff designed specifically for their physiology. It was nothing like the heavy combat weapons used by other species, but in her delicate hands, it moved with surgical precision. She didn't swing it with brute force, she couldn't. Instead, she placed it exactly where it needed to be, exactly when it needed to be there. The staff moved like an extension of her thought, finding pressure points, nerve clusters, and joint vulnerabilities with mathematical accuracy. "They can't overpower opponents," Johnson explained to the fascinated observers. "But they don't need to. They can strike with such precision that force becomes irrelevant. A 1-pound strike to exactly the right spot is more effective than a 100-pound strike to the wrong place." The watching Zilani volunteers began to murmur among themselves in their musical language, the tones rising with excitement as they began to understand what they were witnessing. For the first time since arriving at the station, they weren't just watching others succeed, they were seeing their own potential. Colonel Rodriguez received the updated report that evening with growing amazement and a dawning realization of what they had stumbled upon. "Dr. Vasquez, are you telling me that the Zilani are natural-born precognitive martial artists who have been dormant for 2 millennia? "That's exactly what I'm telling you. But Colonel, there's something else we need to discuss. I've been analyzing the data from their homeworld situation, and there are patterns here that don't make sense for random piracy." "What kind of patterns?" "The attacks on their colonies have been too precise, too well-informed. Someone has been providing the Skarn marauders with detailed intelligence about Zilani defenses, population centers, and resource locations. This isn't random raiding. It's systematic exploitation." Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine as the implications became clear. "Doctor, I think we're not just training a defense force. I think we're training the galaxy's first Zilani intelligence operatives. And they're going to need those skills sooner than we thought." 2 months later, the Zilani had been transformed into something the galaxy had never seen before. The training facility on Luna Station hummed with an energy that bordered on the supernatural. Where once there had been the harsh mechanical sounds of military drilling, now there was a symphony of movement, crystalline forms flowing through combat scenarios with such grace and precision that it resembled an elaborate performance art rather than warfare preparation. Captain Lisa Anderson, the human military strategist assigned to the project, stood in the primary observation deck overlooking Training Complex Alpha. Her background in asymmetric warfare and unconventional tactics had made her the perfect choice to help develop strategies that would maximize the Zilani's unique capabilities. Before her, 50 volunteers moved through advanced combat scenarios that would have challenged elite human special forces units. The transformation was breathtaking. Team Alpha, 5 Zilani led by Zara, infiltrated a mock enemy installation with the fluid precision of liquid mercury. Every step was calculated, every movement served multiple purposes, and every decision was made with the kind of tactical brilliance that usually took decades to develop. "Status report, Alpha Team," Anderson spoke into her communication headset, watching the holographic displays that tracked each team member's position and vital signs. "Target acquired." Zara's voice came through the comm system, her melodic tone now carrying the confidence of a seasoned operative who had learned to wage war like poetry. "Enemy patrol patterns analyzed and memorized. Kef, you have a 12-second window to access the data core. Nira, maintain overwatch position. 3 guards approaching from the eastern corridor. Vex, Jorin, secure the exit routes and prepare contingency extraction points." The Zilani moved like living light through the facility, their crystalline forms bending and refracting the training environment's illumination into dazzling patterns that served as both camouflage and communication. They had learned to use their natural ability to manipulate light reflection, making themselves nearly invisible when they remained perfectly still, and creating complex visual signals when coordination was required. "Remarkable," Colonel Rodriguez muttered, standing beside Anderson as they watched the exercise unfold in real time. "They've mastered techniques in 2 months that our most elite units spend 2 years perfecting. Their natural abilities combined with tactical training have created something entirely unprecedented." "It's not just their enhanced capabilities," Anderson replied, making notes on her tactical assessment pad. "It's their fundamental approach to conflict. They don't think in terms of individual glory, personal survival, or territorial conquest. Every action is evaluated based on collective benefit and minimal collateral damage. They've turned warfare into a form of collaborative art." On the training floor below, the Zilani completed their infiltration mission with flawless execution. No alarms had been triggered, no simulated guards had been alerted, and the objective had been accomplished with 0 detection. But the real test was yet to come. "Initiating combat simulation protocol," announced Sergeant Torres from the control booth. "All teams prepare for hostile engagement scenario." The training environment suddenly erupted with holographic enemies. Detailed representations of Skarn marauders equipped with authentic weapon signatures, movement patterns, and tactical behaviors based on extensive intelligence gathered from previous raids. These weren't simple target dummies, but sophisticated AI opponents programmed to fight with the brutal efficiency that had terrorized peaceful worlds across the galaxy. The simulated pirates charged forward with typical Skarn tactics: overwhelming force, intimidation through size and firepower, and the expectation that their mere presence would cause enemies to flee in terror. They had no comprehension of what they were about to face. Zara moved first, her crystalline form becoming a blur of calculated motion as she flowed between the holographic attackers like water around stones. Her weapon, a lightweight crystalline staff designed specifically for Zilani physiology, struck with surgical precision at neural clusters, joint connections, and weapon control points. She didn't need to deliver devastating blows when she could target exactly the right pressure points to disable opponents instantly. Kef demonstrated the revolutionary defensive techniques they had perfected. As a massive Skarn warrior swung an energy blade toward him, the young Zilani didn't attempt to block or parry the attack. Instead, he moved with such perfect timing and spatial awareness that the attacker's own momentum carried them past their intended target, leaving them off balance and vulnerable to a precisely placed strike at the base of their skull. Nira, whose crystalline patterns showed deep blue veining indicating her specialization in tactical coordination, orchestrated the team's movements like a conductor directing a symphony. Her enhanced nervous system processed the positions and intentions of all combatants simultaneously, allowing her to predict optimal positioning for each team member and communicate adjustments through subtle light patterns that only other Zilani could interpret. Thix had evolved into something unexpected, a master of psychological warfare. His silver-veined form moved through the battle with mathematical precision, appearing and disappearing in ways that confused and disoriented the holographic enemies. He had learned to use the Zilani's natural ability to manipulate light refraction to create optical illusions, making opponents strike at afterimages while he attacked from unexpected angles. The other Zilani flowed around the battle like a coordinated organism, each movement supporting the others, each strike perfectly timed to create maximum disruption with minimal force. Within minutes, the simulation was complete. Every holographic enemy had been neutralized, and not a single Zilani had been touched by enemy fire. "Incredible," Dr. Vasquez whispered from the observation deck, her scientific mind struggling to process what she had witnessed. "They're not just soldiers anymore. They've become something entirely new. Artists of warfare who fight like they're performing a dance that only they can hear." But their transformation extended far beyond physical combat capabilities. In the intelligence section of Luna Station, Commander Sarah Mitchell had been working with a specialized group of Zilani volunteers whose natural abilities made them ideally suited for espionage and information warfare. The sterile environment of the intelligence wing contrasted sharply with the flowing organic aesthetic that the Zilani preferred, but they had adapted with their characteristic grace. "Thix," Mitchell called to her most promising student, a Zilani whose silver veining had intensified during training, indicating enhanced neural development. "Show me what you've discovered about the Vorthan communication protocols." The small crystalline being approached the complex computer terminal with confidence that would have been unimaginable months earlier. His delicate fingers moved across the interface with impossible speed, his enhanced nervous system processing information faster than the quantum computers could display it. The Vorthan Empire employs a multi-layered encryption system that they consider mathematically unbreakable, Thix explained, his voice carrying new authority and technical precision. Their confidence is based on the assumption that no known species possesses the computational capacity to analyze their algorithmic patterns in real time. And their assumption is fundamentally flawed. Thix's crystalline form shimmered with what humans had learned to recognize as Zilani amusement, a subtle shift in light refraction that indicated satisfaction with intellectual achievement. Their encryption is sophisticated by conventional standards, but it follows predictable mathematical progressions. Progressions that our enhanced nervous systems can detect, analyze, and exploit within minutes rather than the years they expect such analysis to require. Within a remarkably short time, Thix had not only broken the Vorthan encryption but had also mapped their entire intelligence network, identified communication hubs throughout their territory, and uncovered evidence that made Mitchell's blood run cold. "Commander," Thix said quietly, his tone shifting to one of serious concern, "the Vorthan Empire has been systematically selling detailed intelligence about peaceful species to mercenary organizations. They've been providing target assessments, defensive capabilities, optimal attack windows, and resource valuations. The raids on our colonies weren't opportunistic piracy. They were carefully orchestrated resource extraction operations." The journey back to Zephyria took 3 days through hyperspace, but for the Zilani aboard the transport vessel Crystalline Dawn, it felt like a lifetime. The ship itself had been modified during their training period, no longer the simple civilian transport that had carried them to Luna Station, but a sophisticated vessel equipped with stealth technology, advanced sensors, and defensive systems that reflected their new capabilities. As they approached their homeworld through the shimmering distortion of hyperspace, the 50 trained Zilani prepared themselves mentally for what awaited them. The ship's crystalline hull hummed with anticipation, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing in rhythm with the collective heartbeat of its passengers. These were no longer the frightened refugees who had fled their world 6 months ago. They were returning as something the galaxy had never seen before. The Zilani transport, now escorted by 2 human corvettes Defiant Spirit and Guardian's Promise, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyria system. What they saw made even the most hardened among them gasp in horror and rage. Through the viewports of the command deck, they could see the systematic destruction that had been wrought upon their homeworld. Skarn raiding ships orbited their planet like metallic vultures, their massive dark hulls scarring the star field with their presence. The ships were enormous compared to anything the Zilani had ever built, brutal constructions of armor plating and weapon arrays that spoke of a philosophy where might made right. Several of the outer moon colonies had been completely destroyed, their remains floating in space like broken crystal jewelry scattered across black velvet. The beautiful spiral cities that had grown from living crystal over centuries were now reduced to glittering debris fields that caught the system's starlight in heartbreaking rainbows. Intelligence reports indicate 47 Skarn vessels in the system, reported Lieutenant Commander Jackson Hayes from the human escort ship Defiant Spirit, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're conducting what appears to be systematic resource extraction rather than simple raiding. They're not just stealing, they're strip mining your entire civilization." Zara stood in the center of the Zilani command deck, her crystalline form now bearing the insignia of a Defense Force commander, a rank that hadn't existed in their society for over 1,000 years, created specifically for this moment. Around her, the 50 trained Zilani prepared for their first real mission with the calm focus of professionals who had learned to transform fear into precision. The transformation in their bearing was remarkable. Where once they had moved with the careful hesitation of beings afraid to break something with their fragility, they now moved with the controlled confidence of specialists who knew exactly what they were capable of accomplishing. "Kef," What's our detailed sensor analysis of the Skarn deployment? Zara asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to command not through intimidation, but through competence. The young Zelani, now serving as their primary intelligence specialist, moved his hands across the crystalline interface they had learned to integrate with human technology during their training. His silver-streaked form glowed with concentration as he processed incoming data at superhuman speeds. The Skarn forces are conducting systematic raids on the northern continent using a predictable rotation pattern, he reported with professional precision. They're employing the same brutal tactics they've used successfully against 17 other peaceful worlds. Overwhelming force applied against defenseless targets, followed by systematic resource extraction and population displacement. Nira, what's our communication status with the resistance networks? The blue-veined Zelani, who had specialized in tactical coordination during training, activated the covert communication arrays they had installed during the ship's modification. I've established contact with the underground resistance network operating in the Crystal Cave systems. Our people have been hiding for months, but they're running out of food, medical supplies, and hope. The Skarn are planning a final assault on the capital city of Lumina tomorrow morning. They intend to end all organized resistance. Zara felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a mantle of living crystal. 6 months ago, she had been a simple philosopher, concerned only with abstract intellectual discussions about the nature of consciousness and the meaning of existence. Now she was a military commander, responsible for the survival of her entire species and the liberation of their homeworld. Thix, have you been able to penetrate the Skarn communication networks? The silver-veined Zelani, who had become their master intelligence operative, nodded, his form shimmering with the satisfaction of technical achievement. Their encryption protocols are surprisingly primitive compared to the Vorthan systems we learned to crack during training. I've successfully identified their command structure, mapped their attack patterns, and discovered something extremely significant. They're receiving detailed operational orders from someone outside this system. Can you trace the source? The signal routing is heavily encrypted and routed through multiple relay stations, but the transmission characteristics and quantum signature suggest the orders are originating from somewhere deep within Vorthan Empire space. Someone with significant resources, advanced technology, and high-level access to military intelligence databases. Zara made her decision with the calm certainty of someone who had learned to think tactically under pressure. We're not just defending our homeworld today. We're gathering evidence for what may be the most important legal case in galactic history. Every Skarn ship we disable, every communication we intercept, every piece of data we collect, all of it goes toward exposing whoever is orchestrating this systematic genocide. The first strike came at dawn, as the binary stars of the Zephyria system painted the crystalline planet's surface in shades of gold and rose. The Skarn had selected a mining colony on Zephyria's largest moon for their morning raid, a facility that had produced the rare crystals used in advanced quantum computers throughout the galaxy. 50 massive warriors in powered combat armor descended from their assault ships in drop pods, expecting to find terrified civilians cowering in crystal caves like they had for the past 6 months. Instead, they found absolutely nothing. "Where are the crystal freaks?" growled Captain Thork, the Skarn raiding leader, his voice distorted by his armor's intimidation speakers. Sensors indicated at least 200 life signs in this mining complex just yesterday. His answer came in the form of a whisper of movement behind him, so subtle that his armor sensors didn't register it as a threat. By the time he turned around, his weapon had been precision disabled, his armor's power cells had been disconnected through microscopic adjustments to their connections, and he was surrounded by 5 small crystalline figures that seemed to have materialized from the very air itself. "Your raid is terminated," Zara said in perfectly accented Skarn, her voice carrying calm authority that cut through the warriors' confusion. "Surrender your weapons and prepare for questioning." Captain Thork laughed, a sound like grinding metal filtered through his armor speakers. "You think you can threaten me, little crystal insect? I'll crush you like—" He never finished the sentence. Zara moved with fluid grace that seemed to defy physics, her crystalline staff striking 3 precise points on his armor in a sequence so fast it appeared simultaneous. The massive warrior collapsed instantly, his nervous system temporarily paralyzed by perfectly placed strikes that had been calculated to cause no permanent damage while ensuring complete incapacitation. Around the mining colony, the same scene played out 50 times in perfect coordination. Each Skarn raider found themselves facing opponents who moved like ghosts, struck like lightning, and disappeared like morning mist. Within minutes, the entire raiding party was unconscious, their weapons disabled, their armor breached, and their communication equipment captured intact. KEF. Data extraction status? Complete success. Every communication device, every computer core, every tactical database, every piece of intelligence equipment, all downloaded and analyzed. The evidence is overwhelming. The Skarn weren't just raiding randomly. They had detailed maps of our mining operations, our population centers, our cultural sites, and our defensive capabilities. How detailed could this intelligence possibly be? Detailed enough that they could only have come from someone with direct access to Galactic Council databases and our own internal planetary surveys. Someone has been selling our people's lives for profit. The counterattack continued throughout the day. Using tactics they'd perfected during training, the Zilani struck at Skarn positions with impossible precision. They didn't destroy the enemy ships. They captured them along with all the evidence they contained. By evening, the surviving Skarn forces had retreated to their command ship, a massive dreadnought that served as their mobile base. Captain Grolix, the overall commander of the raiding fleet, stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. How? He roared at his subordinates. How did we lose 46 ships to a species that doesn't even have a military? Sir, his intelligence officer reported nervously, the Zilani appear to have changed. Our sources indicated they were pacifists, incapable of violence. But the beings we encountered today were highly trained, perfectly coordinated, and equipped with advanced technology. Impossible. The Zilani are the weakest race in the galaxy. Sir, I don't think they are anymore. Grolix's communicator chimed with an incoming message. The seal of the Vorthan Empire appeared on his screen, and Chancellor Vex's voice filled the command deck. Captain Grolix, what is your status report? Chancellor, we've encountered unexpected resistance. The Zilani appear to have received outside assistance. I recommend we withdraw and reassess. Withdrawal is not an option, Vex interrupted. The Zilani homeworld contains resources that the Empire requires. You will complete your mission, or you will face the consequences. The transmission ended, leaving Grolix staring at a blank screen. Around him, his officers exchanged nervous glances. Sir, his second-in-command asked quietly, what are our orders? Grolix looked at his tactical display, showing the 46 Skarn ships that had been captured by an enemy that wasn't supposed to exist. Prepare for orbital bombardment. If we can't defeat them conventionally, we'll destroy the planet from orbit. But he had no idea that every word of his conversation had been intercepted, recorded, and transmitted to a very interested audience. In the underground command center that the Zilani had constructed in the crystal caves, Thix looked up from his communication console with excitement. Zara, we have them. Direct communication between the Skarn command and Chancellor Vex of the Vorthan Empire. Orders to continue the attack despite resistance. References to required resources, and authorization for orbital bombardment if necessary. Perfect. Transmit all evidence to Colonel Rodriguez immediately. And prepare the final phase of our defense. The final phase? Zara's crystalline form glowed with inner light. The phase where we show the galaxy that the weakest race has become something entirely new. The evidence hit the Galactic Council like a quantum torpedo detonating in the heart of civilized space. In the Great Chamber where the Zilani had once begged for protection as the weakest race in the galaxy, massive holographic displays now projected undeniable proof of the most systematic betrayal in galactic history. Communication logs scrolled past in 17 different languages. Financial records showed credits flowing like rivers of corruption, and tactical databases revealed the cold mathematics of genocide disguised as commerce. The chamber itself seemed to vibrate with tension as delegates from hundreds of species absorbed the magnitude of what they were witnessing. The ornate crystalline walls, designed to inspire unity and cooperation, now reflected the harsh light of evidence that threatened to shatter the very foundations of galactic civilization. The Vorthan Empire, Colonel Rodriguez announced to the assembled delegates, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade through silk, has been systematically selling detailed intelligence about peaceful member species to mercenary organizations for the past 47 years. They have facilitated attacks on defenseless worlds while publicly claiming to protect them under the banner of galactic peace. Chancellor Vex stood at his delegation's platform, his reptilian features twisted with a rage that bordered on the murderous. His scaled hands gripped the speaking podium with such force that the metal began to bend under the pressure. These are fabrications, human lies designed to undermine the Empire's legitimate authority and destabilize our rightful position in the galactic hierarchy. The data has been verified by 17 independent forensic analysis teams. Rodriguez continued with the calm precision of someone presenting an airtight legal case, including the Nexari Technological Institute, the Gorak Intelligence Division, the Altarian Truth Seekers, and the Kepler Mathematical Verification Society. Every piece of evidence has been authenticated using quantum-level analysis protocols. This is not speculation. This is documented fact. General Thrak of the Gorak leaned forward in his massive command chair, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lights. His warrior's mind was already calculating the military implications of what they were learning. If these accusations prove accurate, then the Vorthan Empire has violated every fundamental principle of the Galactic Accords. They have committed acts of war against peaceful species while simultaneously claiming to serve as their protectors. Furthermore, Rodriguez added, activating another series of displays that showed real-time intelligence intercepts, the Skarn Marauders currently conducting systematic extermination operations in the Zephyria system are operating under direct orders from Vorthan High Command. They have been instructed to conduct orbital bombardment of civilian population centers if conventional ground operations fail to achieve their objectives. The chamber erupted in chaos that threatened to tear apart the careful diplomatic protocols that had maintained galactic peace for centuries. Delegates shouted accusations in languages that the translation matrix struggled to process, demanded immediate investigations, and called for military intervention. The air itself seemed to crackle with the energy of civilizations choosing sides in what was rapidly becoming an inevitable conflict. But in the midst of the political turmoil, a new voice cut through the noise with crystalline clarity. The Zalani Defense Force, Zara announced from her position at the small but elegantly designed podium that had been constructed specifically for her delegation, formally requests authorization to defend our homeworld by any means necessary, including the capture and interrogation of hostile forces operating in violation of galactic law. The chamber fell silent at those words. The concept of the Zalani having a defense force was still difficult for many delegates to accept, despite the evidence of their recent transformation. For 2 millennia, they had been the galaxy's symbol of absolute pacifism. Authorization granted under Article 12 of the Galactic Defense Accords, declared Prime Minister Jorvak of the Nexari, speaking with the authority of someone who had spent decades studying galactic law. All member species possessed the inherent right to defend their homeworld from illegal aggression, regardless of the perpetrator's political connections. Chancellor Vex's eyes narrowed to reptilian slits as he processed the implications of what had just occurred. You are making a grave mistake that will have consequences far beyond this chamber. The Zalani are weak. They will be crushed like insects, and then you will all have to deal with the reality of challenging an empire that controls 1/3 of galactic commerce. The Zalani, Zara replied with quiet confidence that somehow carried more authority than any amount of shouting, are not weak anymore. Back in the Zephyria system, the final battle for the survival of an entire civilization was about to begin. The Skarn dreadnought Bonecrusher powered up its orbital bombardment systems, preparing to reduce the crystalline cities of Zephyria to lifeless radioactive dust. The massive vessel was a monument to brutality. 3 kilometers of armored death designed to obliterate entire worlds when conventional tactics proved insufficient. Captain Grolix stood on his command deck, surrounded by tactical displays showing targeting solutions for every major population center on the planet below. His scarred face bore the marks of dozens of successful genocide campaigns, and his reputation for thorough brutality had made him the Empire's preferred solution for difficult situations. "Sir," his weapons officer reported with professional efficiency, "all orbital bombardment systems are charged and ready. Primary targets include the capital city of Lumina, the Crystal Gardens of the southern continent, and the remaining civilian shelter complexes. We can begin bombardment on your command." "Excellent. Begin the cleansing. End this embarrassment once and for all." The massive ship's main battery arrays began to rotate toward the planet below, their targeting systems locking onto cities that had grown over centuries without ever knowing the touch of war. But before the weapons could achieve firing position, something impossible happened. The Zilani attacked first. Not from the planet's surface, not from defensive orbital stations, but from space itself. Small, nearly invisible craft emerged from what appeared to be empty vacuum, their crystalline hulls designed to bend light and electromagnetic radiation in ways that made them virtually undetectable to conventional sensors. Where did they come from? Grolix demanded, his tactical training struggling to process what his displays were showing. "Our sensors showed empty space a moment ago." "Sir, I don't understand the readings. They weren't there, and then they were everywhere." The Zilani ships moved with the same fluid grace that their crews had demonstrated during training, flowing around the massive Skarn dreadnought like a school of fish surrounding a whale. Their movements were perfectly coordinated, their attacks precisely targeted, and their objectives clearly defined. But they weren't trying to destroy the massive ship, they were trying to capture it intact. "Boarding pods!" someone shouted from the Skarn bridge, panic creeping into voices that had terrorized peaceful worlds for decades. "They're launching crystalline boarding pods." The pods attached to the dreadnought's hull like exotic parasites, their surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent energy as they burned through armor plating with focused molecular disruptors. Within minutes, Zilani warriors were inside the ship, moving through corridors with impossible speed and devastating precision. Captain Grolix activated his personal combat armor and grabbed his heaviest weapons, ready to show these crystal insects what a real warrior could accomplish. "All hands, repel boarders. Show these pathetic creatures what happens when they challenge the Skarn." He charged around the corner leading to the main corridor, expecting to find a small group of fragile beings that he could crush with his bare hands. Instead, he found himself face to face with Kef, the young Zilani who had once been unable to climb over a 3-foot training wall. The crystalline warrior moved like flowing water, his weapons striking with surgical precision at the joints in Grolix's armor while avoiding every attempt at retaliation. The massive Skarn captain swung his energy blade in a devastating arc that should have cleaved his opponent in half, but Kef was no longer where the blade was aimed. The young Zilani had predicted the attack pattern and moved accordingly, his counterstrike disabling the weapon's power cell with mathematical precision. "Impossible!" Grolix gasped as he found himself disarmed and paralyzed by a being 1/3 his size, his legendary combat prowess rendered useless against an opponent who fought like liquid light. "You were supposed to be the weakest race in the galaxy." "We were," Kef replied in perfect Skarn, his crystalline form glowing with inner light. "But weakness and strength are often matters of perspective. We learned to be what we needed to become." Throughout the ship, the same scene played out as Skarn warriors who had terrorized peaceful worlds for decades found themselves overwhelmed by opponents they couldn't hit, couldn't predict, and couldn't understand. Within 2 hours, the Bone Crusher had been captured intact, along with its entire crew and all of its intelligence databases. "Fix," Zara called through the communication system. "What are you finding in their databases?" "Everything," the intelligence specialist replied with excitement. "Complete records of every raid they've conducted, every world they've attacked, every species they've terrorized, and the financial records showing payments from the Vorthan Empire for each successful operation." "How many worlds?" 47 species have been targeted. The Zilani were just the latest in a long list of victims. Zara felt a cold fury settle in her crystalline core. "Send the data to all affected species immediately. Let them know who their real enemy is." But the battle wasn't over. Throughout the system, other Skarn ships were attempting to escape, carrying evidence of their crimes and their association with the Vorthan Empire. All units, Zara broadcast on the tactical frequency, Priority Alpha. No enemy vessels are to leave this system. We need every piece of evidence, every communication log, every witness. The Zilani Defense Force moved with perfect coordination. Their small, agile ships danced around the fleeing Skarn vessels, disabling engines, jamming communications, and forcing surrenders without destroying the evidence they contained. By the end of the day, the entire Skarn raiding fleet had been captured. Not destroyed, captured. Every ship, every crew member, every piece of intelligence data was now in Zilani hands. Incredible, Admiral Martinez observed from the human escort vessel. They didn't just defend their homeworld. They've collected enough evidence to bring down the entire Vorthan conspiracy. That's not all, Lieutenant Commander Hayes added, studying the tactical displays. They've also demonstrated that they're no longer the weakest race in the galaxy. After today, every species in the galaxy is going to be asking the same question. What question? How do we get the Zilani to train our people? But in the depths of Vorthan space, Chancellor Vex was already planning his response. The Zilani had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Prepare the Imperial fleet, he ordered his military commanders. If we can't defeat them through proxies, we'll have to deal with them directly. Sir, the Galactic Council will never approve. The Council doesn't need to approve, Vex interrupted. The Zilani have humiliated the Empire. That cannot be allowed to stand. The greatest war in galactic history was about to begin. 6 months after the Battle of Zephyria, the galaxy had been fundamentally transformed in ways that would reshape interstellar civilization for generations to come. The Galactic Council chamber hummed with an energy that was both familiar and entirely new. Where once there had been a rigid hierarchy based purely on military might and territorial control, now there was something unprecedented in galactic history. A genuine meritocracy where species were valued for their unique contributions rather than their capacity for destruction. The chamber itself had been redesigned to reflect this new reality. The towering platforms that had once elevated the most powerful species above all others had been replaced by an elegant circular arrangement where every delegation, regardless of size or military strength, could address the assembly as equals. At the center of this new configuration stood a platform constructed from pure Zilani crystal that seemed to pulse with living light. A symbol of how the weakest could become the strongest through determination and cooperation. Ambassador Zara, now bearing the prestigious title of Zilani Defense Minister and Special Coordinator for Galactic Security, addressed the assembled representatives with the quiet authority that came from having literally saved her species from extinction. Her crystalline form had evolved during the conflict, the stress and growth of leadership causing new golden veins to appear throughout her structure, marking her as someone who had been fundamentally changed by the crucible of war. The Vorthan Empire, she announced to the hushed assembly, has been formally charged with crimes against galactic peace under the Enhanced Galactic Justice Protocols. Their systematic exploitation of peaceful species, their financing of genocide operations, and their direct orchestration of attacks on sovereign worlds constitute the greatest betrayal of trust in Council history. Former Chancellor Vex, now wearing the molecular restraints of a convicted war criminal, glared at the small crystalline figure from his prisoner's dock with impotent rage. The mighty Vorthan Empire that had once controlled a third of galactic trade routes had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. This is a complete travesty of justice. The Empire will never accept. The Empire, interrupted General Thrak of the Gorak, his massive form now bearing the insignia of the new Galactic Defense Alliance, no longer possesses the authority to accept or reject anything. Following the comprehensive evidence presented by the Zilani Intelligence Corps, 43 species have formally withdrawn from Vorthan protection agreements. Their territorial control has been reduced to their homeworld and 2 agricultural colony systems. The fall of the Vorthan Empire had been swift, decisive, and surprisingly bloodless. Once the evidence of their systematic betrayal became public knowledge, their member species had revolted not through violence, but through the simple act of walking away. The Skarn marauders, faced with the choice between facing Zilani justice or testifying against their former employers, had unanimously chosen to cooperate fully with galactic prosecutors. But the most significant transformation wasn't the fall of a corrupt empire. It was the rise of something entirely unprecedented in galactic history. The Galactic Council, Zara continued, her voice carrying across the chamber with crystalline clarity, formally recognizes the establishment of the Defense Alliance, a mutual protection treaty between species committed to defending the innocent and maintaining galactic peace through cooperation rather than intimidation. The Defense Alliance had grown far beyond anyone's most optimistic projections. What had started as a desperate partnership between humanity and the Zilani had evolved into a coalition of over 60 species. Many of them former targets of Vorthan exploitation who had discovered their own hidden strengths through the training programs that had been developed. The Alliance, announced Colonel Rodriguez, now bearing the title of Human Defense Coordinator and Strategic Planning Director, offers comprehensive training and protection services to any species that requests assistance. We have proven that every world, regardless of how peaceful or seemingly defenseless, possesses the inherent right and capacity to defend itself when given proper guidance and support. The transformation hadn't been limited to political structures and military alliances. The Zilani training methodologies had revolutionized galactic military doctrine in ways that were still being fully understood. Species that had been considered weak, defenseless, or militarily irrelevant were discovering abilities and strengths that had been overlooked for centuries. The Kepler refugees, with their natural ability to survive in environments that would kill most other species, had become the galaxy's premier survival specialists and emergency response teams. The Altarians, with their enhanced empathic abilities and natural talent for understanding emotional patterns, had proven to be incredible intelligence operatives and diplomatic mediators. The Nexari, combining their already impressive technological prowess with Zilani tactical training principles, had developed defensive systems that made their worlds virtually impregnable without requiring massive military expenditures. The galaxy is demonstrably safer now than it has been in over 2 centuries, Dr. Elena Vasquez observed from her position as Director of Interspecies Development Studies. Piracy rates have dropped by 73%, territorial disputes have decreased by 60%, and economic cooperation between species has increased by over 300%. The transformation had extended far beyond military capabilities into fundamental changes in how galactic civilization operated. The old system of protection rackets, where powerful species demanded tribute from weaker ones in exchange for security, had been replaced by genuine mutual defense agreements based on shared values and cooperative strength. But perhaps the most remarkable change was philosophical rather than practical. We have learned, Zara continued, addressing not just the assembled delegates but broadcast live throughout the galaxy, that strength and weakness are not fixed characteristics, but rather states of potential waiting to be realized. The Zilani were never truly weak. We simply had never been given the opportunity or necessity to discover what we were capable of becoming. She paused, allowing her words to resonate through translation matrices into hundreds of different languages and communication methods. Today, we stand not as the former weakest race in the galaxy, but as proof that any species, any world, any people can rise to meet whatever challenges they face, if they are willing to change, to grow, and to refuse to accept limitations imposed by others. The chamber erupted in something that had never been heard in galactic politics before. Genuine applause that crossed species barriers, a sound of approval and hope that transcended the careful diplomatic protocols that usually governed such gatherings. In the months that followed, the new galactic order would face its own challenges and growing pains. There would be those who resented the changes, who preferred the old system where might made right and the strong preyed upon the weak. But the precedent had been set. The weakest race in the galaxy had become its guardians, and the balance of power had shifted permanently toward those who protected rather than those who conquered. And in the crystal cities of Zephyria, now rebuilt and more beautiful than ever, children learned new stories, not of helplessness and victimization, but of transformation and the infinite potential that lay within every being willing to reach for it. The galaxy would never be the same, and that, everyone agreed, was exactly as it should be. Chat controls Sonnet 4.